lovely to meet you all. I've been able to say hello to most of you, I think. A little bit about my own sales trip, my sales road trip is quite important because I kind of want you to know a bit more about my experience, because then you know that that's where I come from when I speak about sales. So lots of different sectors, lots of different companies I've worked with, but also different sales positions that I've been in as well, which means that I have really benefited from learning a lot about sales. And of course, I started way back. I started when I was 16. And I am probably a lot older than you all think I am, hopefully. But I started at 16 years old at NatWest Bank. So, you know, I was in banking right from an early age, and then went through lots of different sectors, which meant that also I was doing things like selling car seats. I was selling Yellow Pages, which was also well known, a big brand, but equally small businesses, so the SME market, where I was able to work in digital marketing and recruitment. I sold SaaS products. I've also sold hospitality. I worked at a venue for 5 years, which was fantastic times, but also worked through recessions, as I'm sure some of you other guys have as well. So, you know, it's appreciating all of the different experience of B2B selling, B2C selling, different sectors, and through different times. That's how we grow, and I'm sure many of you appreciate that that's the case too. I also ran a business called Truly Madly Baby. This was a company I started when my son was only 3 months old, would you believe, in a moment of madness, but more that I wanted to be with him than actually be working in a corporate and full-time. And after 10 months, I was working full-time anyway, so I hardly saw him, which was the downside. But I took it into Dragon's Den. Doug, I know you have Shark Tank in America. But Dragon's Den was where I met Peter Jones, who invested in my business. Well, we shook hands. We shook hands on the program, and then eventually we didn't do the deal. But that business I ran for 3 years, and I had amazing times. I learned a huge amount from it. And in year 3, we turned over £1 million. We were a profitable business. I had 432 consultants across the UK, and we were selling party plan baby products. And so, you know, this was a retail business, and I had inquiries from America, USA, Australia and Europe to take Truly Madly Baby global. Sadly, I didn't continue because of my story with my business partner, who wasn't Peter Jones, and I lost absolutely everything in 2008. And if you want to know more about that story, you can watch my TEDx talk, which I did in Brighton in 2018, which is called There's No Such Word as Can't. And so everything's in there about my journey as an entrepreneur and losing everything, but also my bounce back ability, which was another one of the webinars that we did. So on to today, because we're talking about sales, because 3 years ago, I set up my new business. It's nearly 4 years ago now, which is Live It, Love It, Sell It. And ultimately, I knew I wanted to help people. I love people. That's why I've been in sales for over 30 years. But I also knew that what I really wanted to do was tell people about sales in a different way, because I had been trained to death how to sell. Some of you on this call would definitely have been in sales for sure, and I suspect had sales training. And I'd had all of the training you can imagine. But every time I would go out, I would do it probably different, not quite how I'd been taught to do it. And yeah, I was always consistently successful at selling. So it's quite interesting. When I started the business, I wanted to create my own methodology around sales, which is what I did. So I want to just ask you a question about your current situation in sales, and you can use the chat for this, and Georgina, who's with us, is going to help me to do this. Can you just tell me how you are currently feeling about selling? Because this is an ever-moving thing at the moment. That's the point, really, is that we're always changing how we feel. That's part of life. But having gone through this pandemic together and still going through it, how are we currently feeling about selling? If you can put it into the chat, that would be great. And then in a minute, I'm going to get Georgina to just tell us what's come out of the chat, and then we can move forward from there. While we're just waiting for those answers to come in, I want to just sort of, I guess I want to address the elephant in the room for me, and that's old school sales. And when I say old school sales, this is really how I was taught how to sell and how I was managed when I worked in businesses by my leaders. And it was very much about the numbers, the targets, revenue, very much around timescales, because we would have monthly targets or quarterly targets. And also this whole pushing element, you know, we've got to keep pushing, push, push, push. And it was almost like this standard thing. You've got to push, you've got to close things, you've got to get the numbers in, we've got to hit the targets by the end of the month. And that was the mentality that was very much driven through my sales career. And it was also very robotic. You know, we almost didn't have a chance to be us. It was very much, this is what we sell, you know, this is why it's great for you, do you want to buy it? And it was really very much this kind of production line approach of selling. And I know for a fact that sales is still being taught like that. I think there's been some tweaks, but I think we're still seeing this old methodology creeping in, because it's been around for a very long time. And the numbers game, some say, works. Because actually, I guess logically, if you ring enough people, somebody's going to say yes at some point. But it's looking at it in a bigger way and saying, well, actually, what's productive? Actually, what's really needed right now? Because our time right now is very different, but it's changed. Ever since I started work at 16, it's changed right from there. So before we start looking at the market right now, because I'm going to give you a few stats and a little bit of information about what HubSpot, because I actually use HubSpot and I used to sell HubSpot, and it's a really good CRM tool that's out there that you can utilize. But they really do provide great data because they're selling globally. So some of this data is very interesting just to visit. So Georgina, tell me what has been going on in the chat.
So we've got quite a few positive, cautiously optimistic, less hesitant, more positive. Doug Thompson, selling is life. There's a few that have obviously suffered with their old services, so they're having to pivot. Again, it's just looking at more of they know what their Tasha was saying, that she knows what her services are, but she's not keen on her key performance indicators, but knows that's how to help build up.
Yeah, exactly that. Okay, that's brilliant. So actually, when we did, if any of you came to the Selling in the Pandemic webinar, we had a lot more cautiousness. We had a lot more people who are worried. This feels like it's got a bit more optimistic, doesn't it, Georgina, I think, from the sound of things. Yeah. Although we've had to adjust, but we kind of knew we would, because no one's ever had anything like this happen before, have they? But this webinar is about moving on from the Selling in the Pandemic webinar for me, because I want to look at almost our ongoing journey from now on. Okay, whilst yes, we know it's going to change. That's the message from today's webinar, all right? So let's just look at the market now. As I mentioned to you, now, if you can't see these slides really clearly, I'm going to have slides available for you to check in anyway, but you can also find this data on the website for HubSpot, and I will send a link out for you after this webinar, because it's really interesting data to follow. What HubSpot have done is they have followed globally 70,000 different companies, and that's from one-man band companies who use HubSpot like I do, to big companies who are over 200 people in their companies, and they're using HubSpot in a probably more complex way. But they have the data across the board and across the globe. Okay, so these charts are global. And it's really interesting to see what's happened. So that very line through the middle, which is actually 0%, if you can see it, it actually says 0%. Now that very first bit is from the 1st of January. So it's right from the beginning. So it's pre-COVID. So you can start to see that it's very flat. There was a little bit of activity. It was kind of just chugging along. And then you can see immediately, just at a glance, where COVID hit, which is around March. And you can see everything's dropping out the bottom of this chart. Now, this chart represents deals. So with HubSpot, when you know you're going to do some business with somebody, you put it into HubSpot as a deal. Sometimes they don't come off, but ultimately it's your pipeline. That's kind of how it works. So you can start to see all of those deals that weren't happening that had potentially happened before, and also conversion of deals. Everything dropped. What's really nice about this chart now is this goes up to June, and now look what's happening to it. You can start to see now that deals are coming back. Now, the thing is, what's important about that is that that means people are buying. And we knew people would have to be buying because the world has to carry on. But this chart's very hopeful. I think this has a really positive thing for us to look at. If you then look at this next one, this is really interesting. Let me move slightly to the side here, look, because I can just jig. This is about conversations. So, you know, my big thing, if anyone has followed me, is that it's all about the human conversation. And what's happening now with HubSpot is they are seeing more and more people having conversations. So rather than relying on it just being written and text and email, people are now talking to each other. Now, the way they're doing that is not necessarily cold calling, but they're actually reaching out in a way that says, how are you? What's going on? What's happening in your world? And so there's this growth, and people are now adapting and adopting conversation as opposed to just written. That's brilliant. I think this is massive for us in this particular webinar to realize that this has to now be a big part of your strategy, is that we start to have more and more conversations, and they can be from warm. We're not talking about just ringing up as many people as we can ring. We're talking about quality conversations. But this is what is happening on HubSpot. They're seeing more and more of this. On from that, then, this is all about sales emails. Very interesting, because again, look what happened when COVID hit. Everybody decided they just have to sell. Let's panic. Let's just sell to everybody. Let's see what sticks. Throw it all at the wall, see what sticks. And of course, you can see from the green line, which is then actually the people who were responding to the emails, look what happened to that. So then you've got this huge influx of emails going out, and then you've got the line that says, actually, nobody's interested in these. And that's really interesting because that has carried on. Look what's happened. We are still doing this, but we're still not getting the response that we want. So where we're getting the response actually is from conversations. And also what's happening is conversion is taking longer. So there's quite obvious stuff when you think about it logically, but I think it's about changing behavior. I think this is the big piece that I am seeing now, is that we have to start changing behavior. When you look at what HubSpot report back, because what's the nice thing about this data is you can then get a full report back of what each chart means. So again, I recommend you go and have a look at the link. They're saying that while buyer engagement is actually starting to reach an all-time high, and this will be because yes, people need to buy things. This will also be that more people are back at work, because that's obvious as well. We are not coming close to a corresponding increase suggesting that salespeople are actually reaching out to a poor fit of prospect. So there's that panic sitting there. There's that panic to say, we're just trying to speak to everybody and anybody that we can. And so we have to get smarter with how we sell. And I'm seeing it. I'm seeing people talk about this. I'm seeing it happening. It is exciting. But again, this webinar is all about you guys thinking about what you then take back to your businesses and start implementing that you're not doing already, or what you continue to do, or how you target and how you measure. So what happened to us as humans? Well, if you did come to the pandemic webinar, you will have heard me talk about grief. Grief is a horrible thing, but when we lose something, we go into a state of grief. That's a human reaction. And the Kubler-Ross change curve, which some of you may be familiar with, demonstrates this really, really well. So what happens initially, it's called the ending because it's the ending of something. It creates sometimes shock. We're often in denial. And that's what happened when pandemic hit. Without doubt, I think every one of us felt this ending piece emotionally. Now that middle piece, which they call the neutral zone, which is quite an interesting title for it, this is then about frustration, potential depression at its really bottom part. But this is the lost bit. This is where, well, now we're not really sure what we need to do. And then we need to go into the next part, which is called the beginning. So really nice positive title for this bit. But this is where we start understanding where we're at. We start learning from it. And we actually have acceptance of the position that we're all in. Now, this isn't just a life graph. And it isn't just a business graph. It's also a sales graph. And it's a demonstration of how we may feel as salespeople, but it's also a demonstration of how your customers are feeling. The reason I wanted to include it again in this webinar, again, this is one to write down because it's important enough to have come up more than once. This is about the fact that this curve will remain for some time yet. We will go back and forth through this curve. And the thing about this curve is you've got things like a second spike. Now, we've all heard it. We've all talked about it. We have no idea what it will look like. We don't know when it will come. Maybe it won't come, but we're probably all honestly prepared that it will. We've seen towns in the UK, Doug, I don't know about you in the US, but in the UK, we've seen towns individually locked back down again because they've had a spike in the cases. This is going to just be our life for a little bit longer. And because of that, the knock-on effect will be in business, we will have this curve going on. So the key thing with this new landscape of sales is that we've just got to have awareness around it so that when we are connecting with our customers, that we're checking in and we understand where they are on the curve. So the curve's really useful for us to just be aware of, I think, and have in our minds when we're talking to our customers. Now, I love Charlie Mackesy. You may know his book, and I think it's called, I never get it in the right order. I think it's The Boy, the Fox, the Mole, and the Horse. If it's in the wrong order, then forgive me. Fabulous book with beautiful illustrations, and he has these lovely sayings he puts through this book. And this is one that's really relevant, I think, for now, which is, what's the best thing that you've learned about storms? Well, that they end. And this is also true. And so we're now seeing that it's changed from the selling in the pandemic webinar that I did. We've moved on, but we're still in this unknown territory. But it will end. This will end and something new will happen. And then we'll learn to deal with that as well. So this is about ever changing, I think, now when we're moving forward. Life, business, and sales, all of them. It's applicable for everything. So what's this new landscape all about? You know, let's have a little look at what this really means to us. What will our customers expect from us? Because really the customer is king, okay? And some people, you know, I read a lot of LinkedIn, I'm on every day, and I hear lots of different opinions. And some people say, you know, it's not just the customer who's king, the salesperson's king too still. And I think the salespeople can be king, but they have to only be king because they understand who the customer is. The customer's driving everything right now, and we have to go with that. And I've said before, we walk alongside them and we hold their hand as opposed to try and lead the way. like traditional sales was always what we did, was we were king as salespeople, we had the knowledge and we led the way. But of course, they are far more educated now than they've ever been in terms of what they can find out and what they know. So they want us now to meet us where they are now. And this is that ever-changing place. So we could say today, right, okay, I've had a chat with my customer, I know where they are now. Is that where they'll be in 3 weeks' time? Ever likely that will change. So their world will keep changing. So we need to keep meeting them where they are now. This isn't just something you'll do. You've done it, tick a box, right, we know where they are. Now we start selling to that end. We have to always be talking and understanding where they are now. So in the now is where we work with our customers, and that's what they expect from us. And George Bernard Shaw said this, and I have used this one in a previous webinar, but I love it so much because the single biggest problem in communication is the illusion that it took place. And it's so true. We may think we've communicated. We may think we got the message right. But if we didn't, if our customer doesn't think that, then we haven't made that connection. And that's why we need to have these conversations, which is what we saw earlier on those graphs. So we really understand what is it that the customer needs. It's no longer a time to feel like we have to know the right questions to ask. You've got to trust this. We know how to have human conversations in life. We've done that since we were really small children. We need to trust that those conversations now are about asking, what do you need from us? Where are you at? What's your world like? That's really important. And so is innovation. We've seen lots of that across the pandemic from lots of different companies, switching, making face masks, switching, making ventilators. And you've heard all of those wonderful stories out there about innovation. And you too will have innovated. Somebody in the comments, I think, said about pivoting. You know, that was that magic word that came out. Some people are a bit fed up with that word now. I don't care. I know what it means, and it means you've adjusted and you've just switched to where you need to be for your customer. And if you can become as innovative as you can forever now, actually, not just now, just keep being innovative and let down the guards and let creativity come through. You suddenly start creating wonderful products that you never thought you could create, and wonderful ways of delivering them that you never thought you could deliver. So this is about allowing yourself to be free, I think, now, and more creative. Nothing is wrong. Nothing's bad. No idea is a bad one right now. And I think that's really, really important for us to embrace. So there's kind of I like my anagrams. Some of you will know when you've sort of watched my webinars, but there's one around love. You know, I believe now it is about loving your customers, not selling to them. And love spells out a really great acronym. The first L is for listen. You know, we have heard this, again, write it down because I keep saying it, it must be important. Listen is just one of the most beneficial things you can do, but you've got to listen thoroughly. You really have. We cannot assume anything. And this has to be our way going forward. We were taught in my day, when I was trained how to sell, we were taught to assume everything. Assume exactly what the customer needed, exactly when they needed it, and that they would choose you, basically. And that was how we were taught to sell. And it's just not like that anymore. So we have to listen. And you know, when we listen, we're able to actually innovate, because we're then adjusting ourselves and being creative to what our customers are asking us to do. So listen's huge. O of love is for options. More than ever, we've got to make it easy for customers to buy from us, because they don't want to just come and buy what they've always bought from us anymore. It may need tweaking. It may need to feel different. It may need slightly different payment terms. It may need to do different things. And that's where options come in. And we can, again, be creative around what options we give people. Anyone who has seen my value ladder, then they'll understand that it's about having a selection of different services and products that allow your customer to come with you at their pace. So you can't sell your customer everything at once. Sometimes they just want to test. Sometimes they want to just build trust with you. And options is where all of this lovely stuff starts kicking in. So options is massively important. And value, of course. Everybody's talking about value. But what does value really mean? So, of course, we kind of know what value means to us because we know what we're selling. We know the value in the product or service we provide. But how often do we ask our customer what they think value is? Because if you don't do the two and connect them, then you can't create 100% value. You could assume that your customer thinks that's valuable, but we've just said that's not a good thing to do right now. So value is also so important now for how you then show up in the world. And remember that we buy emotionally. And boy, do we buy emotionally sometimes. Probably right now, we're probably buying more emotionally than ever. But we do. That's just a fact. We connect emotionally as humans. And so if we like somebody and we trust them, and it's more the trust element actually than anything, we do want to pursue a sale with them. I've walked away from sales before when I didn't like the person or I didn't feel they understood me or listened to me. So this part is so important. And equally, when we've looked at things like storytelling, you know, emotion is really critical in that. And again, in that webinar, you can catch up on all of these webinars on my YouTube channel. So if you didn't come to the Why Stories Sell webinar, then that's well worth catching up on. There's a lot of great information in that about emotions and why we connect with stories. So how can you motivate yourself and your team? And some of you are solopreneurs like me, working on your own. That's tough. You know, you can only motivate yourself then. That's really hard going. Some of you will be running a team. And so thinking about the ways now that you motivate your sales team or yourself to be able to grow your business and grow the revenue in your business. Because, you know, I talk about revenue and I always say, oh, you know, we don't want targets that have got revenue in them. But the fact is that businesses need revenue to run. Okay, we know that. But humans create revenue. And I guess that's where I come from. Take it all back and decide where the revenue truly comes from. And it is from humans and their interaction and connection. So to motivate your team, you need to start thinking about what is truly going on out there. And this, again, is a stat that's so important to us as salespeople, because 70% of buyers have already defined their needs before they speak to us. And 44% have actually decided very specifically what they want. That might be with things like tech, you know, something that's got a little bit more to it. They will have Googled, they've gone to our friend Google and found out everything they needed to know about their product and said, yes, that's the one I want. Which is slightly short-sighted, of course, we would say as salespeople. But the fact is, this is how they're arriving to you. So you need to be very aware of that. And the sales process is also now taking 22% longer than it did 5 years ago. And that's because people have choice, the buyer is king, and so we don't have to rush these purchases quite like we used to. And we're certainly not pushed into them anymore because we're a bit smarter than that as buyers. So you are now in marketing. So there's the big news of the webinar. If you ever thought you were in sales and you didn't think you were in marketing, then now is the time to adjust. The landscape of sales just got very exciting because now you are marketeers. And the big thing about now is I will decide, I'll be 70% down that buying journey before I decide that I want to speak to somebody. So what was I doing during the beginning of that journey? I was watching, I was maybe online, on social media, maybe on LinkedIn, YouTube. I was watching, who do I like? Do I like what they're saying? Do I like them as a person? Are they showing up regularly? Do they feel like they've got wisdom? Then they are on my shortlist when I come to buy. And that is what's happening today in sales. And so you be visible right at the beginning of that journey, right from the start, so that everybody knows who you are. And the thing about this is kind of what I believe I've done many, many years in sales anyway, probably without even realizing it. But when this pandemic hit and I lost £25,000 off my bottom line, just like that. For a small solopreneur, that's a lot of money, because it was speaking events and it was workshops. I sat and thought, that was it. That was the end. I genuinely did. I picked myself back up, because it's kind of how I am anyway, ever positive. I switched on to online, everything that wasn't online. And then I carried on. Now, clients came to me. I picked up new clients, and I picked up one after the other after the other. And you know what? I was thrilled. I was surprised. And then when I looked at it, I thought to myself, my methodology says that this is what happens, and it works. Because they had watched, they had seen me visible, and they had realized that now they had the time to do something, they could do it, and they wanted to do it with me. Honestly, that's just a true story, and lovely to be able to tell, because it means that the way this works is right. So be visible and do all of these things, and your customers will start to find you. And that's true. And the biggest thing, this is the bit I love the most, right? Again, write this one down. I'm going to keep telling you. Every time I meet you, I'll tell you this. USP. Okay, we all know, if we've been in sales, certainly if we've been trained, the USP, your unique selling proposition. So this was a phrase coined in the 1940s. And it was what everybody said you needed to have in sales. It's the thing that makes you different. So what's your USP? And of course it was, well, my widget is world changing. And I've been going for 30 years. And, you know, those were the USPs that we were always told to look out for, and we were always hearing. And of course, the more people that are now running their own businesses, the more knowledgeable our buyers are. This stuff doesn't matter to them half as much as it matters as who you are. And you are your UHP. So this is your unique human proposition. Remember, this is what is massive for you going forward with the landscape of sales changing, because it's all about personal brand, and it's all about people, and it's all about you understanding that your UHP is your greatest asset. Where a widget can be reinvented by someone else and be even better than your widget, where someone could have done something for 35 years instead of 30 years, your UHP will always be yours, because you are unique. There's only one of you on the planet. Bupa recently did an advert which said there are 7.1 billion types of normal on the planet. And I thought, oh, I love that, because that is true. There's no one like you. So why then will you not use that as your greatest asset when you're selling? This is the future and the new landscape of selling. And this is what you can focus on more than anything. So your unique human proposition. Every interaction that you make in any form is branding. You know, you are a personal brand. And it's hard sometimes. People say to me, yeah, but I don't know how to do that. I don't know what that looks like. This is again about just letting our guard down, just being authentic, being you. People will remember what colors you wore if you wear the same colors each time. I know a wonderful lady in sales, and every time she pitches up, she's got pink on. Every time. We know her for the pink. We just know her for that. She's great at what she does, but that's how we recognize her, and that's what we're drawn to, and that's how she's memorable. I call it your isms. So what are the words you say? What are the phrases that you use? I always say there's no such word as can't. I use life skills as sales skills, you know, and I use all of these words that are my words in my language, and I show up as me. Because I now know that it's okay to be me, and that not everyone will buy from me. And that's the other thing. So don't adjust so that you're right for everybody. Just be you and be your personal brand. Now that's great if you're running your own business and you're a solopreneur. You can really stamp your mark on your business. What if you're in a sales team? Or what if you're a leader of a sales team? How does this work for you? Well, here's how. I would hope that the guys in your team have probably been employed because they have the same values as the business, and you know they buy into the whole purpose and belief and concept of that business. That would be great if that's your starting point. And then every single one of those in your sales team are unique human propositions. And what you really want is that they are then allowed to be their own personal brand within your brand. That's when magic happens. When I ran a team at the venue I worked at, we were missing target by £2 million on a 6 million target. That's a massive loss. And the story's, you know, a longer story for other days, but the whole point of why we recovered, and within 18 months we smashed that 6 million target by 180,000, was because I created a team of people who had their own UHPs. So they were doing business they loved. They were dealing with clients they loved, and they were being them with their own way of talking and their own way of being and their own way of showing up. Oh my goodness, it was wonderful. It was truly, truly wonderful. Just allowing these people to be truly them. And people buy that, and they did, and we hit the target. And that was part of why this worked. And we didn't chase the target. We looked at all of the things we've just been talking about, meeting our customers where they are now, understanding what they really needed from us and why they bought from us, why they came to our venue. What was it that they loved? So every interaction in that story was about branding, but about the personal branding of the people in the team as well, which is so important. So be uniquely you. Isn't this guy dapper? Isn't he memorable? But be uniquely you, because that's why people will buy. And the biggest thing you have that's unique is your stories. And as I say, I did a webinar just about storytelling, but these will always be important in this new landscape of sales. I'm not sure that actually when I was trained to sell, we ever talked about stories. I swear we just didn't. It wasn't something that we even explored in any way. And yet stories are the fundamental way we connect as humans. And so make your stories statistical if you want to, although 63% of people remember stories and only 5% of people remember statistics. Georgina's smiling because she says that, because we've had chats about that one, haven't we, Georgina? It's my favorite because it's a stat, but it's about stories. So it always makes me smile. But it's true, people remember stories. Make them transformational, observational, relevant, and impactful, empathetic, and sensational. Imagine that. These are the way that we can tell our stories. This is how we get remembered, and this is how we connect as humans. So part of UHP is bringing your stories, because nobody's got your stories either, which is even more interesting. And then obviously Maya Angelou, you will have definitely seen this, because I definitely talk about this one a lot, and it's true. People, you know, they will forget what you've said, and they will also forget what you did, but they will absolutely remember how you made them feel. And this goes back to the emotions we talked about in my LOVE acronym. We sell and we buy emotionally. And if we do that and we connect as humans, then this is definitely the landscape of sales that I love and that I want to see us moving forward with. So ultimately, we have to think about strategy, okay? Because, you know, it's one of those lovely words, and some of us feel it's a bit corporate, but strategy is a good thing to have. It's kind of a plan. I'm really thinking about now, knowing what we know about old school sales, knowing what we know about all of these lovely things that I've just been talking about, how can we best look at benchmarking and measuring now with these particular things we've talked about today? You know, the old school sales focus was always about revenue. It was always about targets. The KPIs were usually about activity. How many calls have you made? How many emails have you sent? And it was always about driving the numbers. You know, that was my experience of sales for many, many years. And I know for a fact that's how we drive sales still today. We've got to get smart with sales in the way that we form those KPIs. And we've got to start thinking about the fact that KPIs can be whatever we want them to be, really. Yes, we want to measure them, but why don't we measure things like outcomes and relationships as opposed to the actual figures? Because when you concentrate on human connection, the people stuff, relationships, making it the right relationships with the right customers, the revenue comes. Look at my story, go back to it again, 4 million to 6 million, but with 180k extra on top. That wasn't an accident, but we did not push against revenue. That wasn't our strategy. We looked at relationships. We looked at focusing on mindset and motivation. And we looked at how we communicate and understanding the world of our customers, but equally understanding our own market and seeing how that was moving and shifting. We have to now look at things like weekly trends and targets, not setting monthly and quarterly targets, because that's too prescriptive. We don't know what's going to happen next. What if everything closes down again? What do we do? How do we move? Those targets will be pointless to have. So you can have your targets, but don't focus everything on that. Think about how you're going to get to those targets with the human side of all of this selling philosophy now that I'm talking about. So your measurements, conversations, measure how your team are feeling, because the more motivated your team are, the more they will be productive. I said to every one of my team members, what's your target? They made their targets. How interesting is that? Bit risky. My boss wasn't happy. What's your target? I said. And they made their own targets. And guess what? They owned their own targets. We've got to start trusting people to be human and actually to do a great job for us. We'll soon know if they're not, but we've got to give them a chance to actually show us what they can do and bring out their UHPs. There it is again. We have to get the message right for our customers. I had a lady in HR who I coach, and she was talking about doing some webinars, and the webinar she was going to do was all around how the new laws had come in. There's a whole load of new legislation and new laws. So the title of the webinar, I don't know, probably off the cuff, it was something around the new laws and regulations around HR. It's great. I mean, we need to know that stuff, yeah? But she hadn't got anybody who was really interested in coming. Honestly, they didn't want to know about that right now. What they were more interested in is how they were going to get their people back to work, or how they were going to reintegrate people back into the workplace, or how they were going to actually get them to go back to work, because some of them didn't even want to go back anymore. Huge amounts of challenges around the now. Remember, meet your customer where they are now. So she changed the name of her webinar, talking about furlough. So it was very current, and everybody wanted to know about furlough. Most people didn't understand it. And guess what? During that, she was able to feed in some of the new laws and regulations. Get the message right, because it doesn't mean the laws and regulations weren't right. It just means to get people to come to actually listen to you and engage with you, you've got to meet them where they are now. That was a great example of getting message right. And remember, the message is always going to change. So you've got to be in touch with what's happening in the market, how your customers are feeling. And here's the revelation: remote selling. Wow, how exciting is this? How many of us are fed up of Zoom calls. How many of us have experienced Zoom fatigue? It's a real thing, it exists. But you know what? The thing about remote selling is, what I would really hate to happen now is that we suddenly say, oh, that's over then. Thank goodness for that. Because I don't think that's what you should do when you're thinking about your strategy. I think there will hopefully there will be face-to-face things happening. I really hope so. We have to have that. We're wired that way. I want to hug people again. I'm a hugger. But remote selling has a huge place now in our strategy, more than ever. How many times have you spent 4 hours in a car one way and 4 hours back for a half an hour meeting? If I got paid for every time I've done that, I would be truly rich in my 30 plus years of selling. But we can be smart with remote selling. And the thing about it is it's much more focused. It's still good because you can see people. You can still have an element of connection. And guess what else happens? You get global reach. How amazing is that? You know, you may have had really strict parameters to only work within a local area with what you do. And now imagine you could work beyond that area. And it could be that you can deliver your product or service beyond that area. That's exciting. And it's opened up this new world for us, which I think also helps with the communication and the meeting customers where they are now and being able to understand them. Here for remote selling, seriously. Use it where you think it is good and productive to use. But please don't leave it behind once everything goes back to us being able to meet in person. I would be really sad if that happened. So 3 things to do after this webinar, okay? 3 key things. There's probably lots more, hopefully, but 3 key things. The first thing is differentiate yourself. These are all donuts, but they're very different donuts. I really wish I hadn't done this because I'm so hungry now. I've looked at them. Donuts, and they're all different, and so you're all different, and so you need to differentiate yourself. Think about UHP. What is it that's different about you? What is it that's memorable about you? How are you showing up with your message that's different, just positioned different, bit of humor maybe, bit of storytelling that's your stories? It is not difficult to differentiate, so really start thinking hard about how you're going to do that. Motivate. So this is actually a very, very important word. We can't ever achieve things if there's no motivation to do so. But what truly helps us to be motivated is knowing where we're going, knowing what our outcomes are, knowing what we're aiming towards. And think about all of those KPIs in sales that you can now start putting together. Not just revenue, things like conversations, things like really identifying true customers who are the ones you really want to learn from, because we're learning from customers as much as they are from us. Those things are the things that start to motivate us and connect us and then allow us to achieve the goals we want. And the third thing is educate. And I don't just mean educate ourselves, because obviously we should always be doing that anyway. But we have this wonderful opportunity to educate our audience. We can do things like webinars. Quite good, really, aren't they? We can do things like podcasts. We can do things like social media posts. We can do video. We can have YouTube channels. How many times are we able to educate people with the amazing knowledge that we all have? And somebody out there somewhere needs your knowledge, even when you think they don't. I suffer from imposter syndrome like the next person. I sit here sometimes and think, everybody knows all the things I'm going to talk about today. And that's just not true. So educate your audience, because that's how you start to be in that little journey. You know, that 70% bit that we talked about earlier, that's when you're in their face, educating them. And when they're ready, they'll say, that's where I'm going to go to buy. Nothing ever stays the same. I know it's obvious, but the fact is Nothing's going to stay the same all of our lives. And actually, hallelujah for that, because we really do want things to change, to just keep us going, our energy levels up, our thought process going. It's exciting to have change. But remember the Kubler-Ross curve and how it makes us feel. So just be in touch with all of these things, but don't be afraid to go with this new landscape of sales and start really embracing how creative we can now all be. Sales is not a process, not anymore. Sales is about relationships. I'm really excited about that. Final thoughts. It's time to put humanity into sales. Okay, this is just the way. There's no going back. Okay, tell yourself that, no going back. And the humanity is about being human and unique. It's about mindset. Ask and never assume, ever. If I ever hear anyone assuming, I shall tell them off. Work with integrity and build trust. And remember that this is not about you. This is about your customer. So let's put humanity into sales and have human conversations. And I'm a good old chatterbox, as you probably all know, but this is the way to go. Good, wholesome, human conversations, and stop selling to our customers and start loving them. And then Charlie Mackesy, last words for him. We have got a long way to go. We know that. We don't know what's going to happen next, if we're really honest, but look how far we have come. And I always say, only look back to see how far you have come. It's such a great message for us all. So in the comments, what one thing will you do differently after this webinar? Put in the chat. Let's hear, what are you going to do different? One thing, it might be more than one, hopefully, but what one thing has struck home that you can change to make sure that your landscape of sales just got really, 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 really exciting. Let's see what you think. And while you're doing all that, this is the bit where I just tell you how to connect with me. If you don't know, there's a book. It's called Live It, Love It, Sell It. You'll love it. There's a podcast called The Human Conversation. I love doing this. I started this a couple of years ago. I literally just chat. It is literally human conversations. But I hope that it's interesting to the listeners. And I also think, again, for you guys, think about how you could start your own podcasts, especially if you're in business now. Corporates are now starting to look at podcasts. And if you don't have a YouTube channel, you must get one. It is the second largest search engine in the world, and Google own it. So I would really recommend, you can repurpose so much back onto YouTube. If you're making videos, then have a YouTube channel and just upload those so that we can find you there as well. I've got an online program called the Pick and Mix. This is because my dad ran the local newsagents when I was a little girl. So I grew up in a sweet shop. It was incredible. And then the UHP is a program. It's a full-on program where I really go into depth about how to create your own UHPs. And also there is one-to-one coaching. So if there's any questions, please do pop them into the chat. I'm happy to unmute you all, and if someone wants to actually ask anything, they can. But if you don't have any questions then, and you think of them later, then please do let me know, because that would be amazing. Any questions? Georgina, what have we got going on in the chat? Let's have a chat about it.
Yeah, so we've got a lot more goals to focus on their UHPs. They're going to look at their UHP. They've set their own KPIs, focus more time and listening to the customer. It has come up a couple of times. Build their YouTube channel.
Yay!
And they love the UHP thinking.
Good.
So
Good.
yeah, lots on there. Listening to people again, listening and building up relationships.
It's an ongoing thing. It's not just a case of, oh yeah, we're going to listen more. We have to always be listening because it's just changing. Everything's moving so fast at the moment, isn't it? So any questions from the audience? You can unmute if you want to ask anything. And if not, then thank you so much for coming to my webinar today. This will be recorded, so if any of your colleagues wanted to see it and they couldn't make it, then please just go to the YouTube channel in a few days and I'll let you know when that's live. And if you want a virtual cuppa to talk about how we could work together, then let's do it. The link will be in the replay on YouTube at the bottom.
Judith has just asked in the chat, could you break down non-selling on social media?
Oh, non-selling. Okay. For me, Judith, non-selling. Where are you, Judith? Can I still see you? Are you on with? Yeah, you're there, aren't you? For me, non-selling is about what I talked about with education, really, Judith. So this is about showing people who you are. So it's things of interest to your customer. So for me, when I'm posting on LinkedIn, I'll probably do or try to do maybe 4 posts that are educational. So I might be talking about certain topics within sales, so that I'm always giving something. I might be pointing to maybe a TEDx talk that really resonated with me. I might do a poll. You can now do polls on LinkedIn. They're really useful to get information back from your audience, to see how they're feeling. Remember about meeting your audience where they are now. And then the selling post would then be, come to a webinar, maybe I've got a new course starting. They're gentle selling posts as opposed to buy, you know. And the same with DMs on things like LinkedIn, you know, direct messaging on LinkedIn. Just have to be really careful not to sell too soon to people. They want to start following you and building up who you are, getting your knowledge, making it feel like they trust you before they really actually want to start talking to you about buying from you. So hopefully that helps. But non-selling posts on social media for me is all about education, and just giving people things that they can take away without, it's called kind of giving, expecting nothing in return, I guess, is a great way to describe it. Let me know in the chat if that helped, Judith. Yeah, Tasha's just put, she adds a Calendly link, and I use Calendly, Tasha. I've only just met Tasha, actually. We had a virtual cuppa the other day, didn't we? Hi, Tasha. Yeah, it's really useful to have your Calendly link set up just to take things just that bit further offline. So you've got that one-to-one conversation, and that's what my virtual cuppa is very much about. And yeah, same, if there's something to take somebody somewhere else, those links are wonderful, aren't they? Just one click. How do you use your Calendly in your business, Tasha?
So when I tend to post, especially on LinkedIn, I think recently where my focus has been, I offer it as a, if you would like to start a conversation, here's my diary. So I'm very conscious that I don't like being sold to, you know, this is exactly where you're coming from as well. So I use it as a you know, an offering really, if somebody wants to take it that step further. Obviously we haven't had a conversation before, but I had a bit of a tete-a-tete with somebody I'm working with on a different project, and she hated it. She's like, no, you can't do that, you've got to build. But I'm like, well, we're here to sell, and we're here to make money.
Yeah.
And people need help, and therefore they need to know where to find us. So yeah. I always do this. So it was kind of interesting seeing from somebody else's mindset. I'm like, well, I'm not sure where we're going to go in our future business arrangements.
Yeah, but also, Tasha, it's about the fact that you're not actually selling, you're taking it to the conversation. So actually you're taking it to the next step. And that's the bit that we talked about at the beginning, where we talk about conversations. And that's where a lot of selling is happening now, in conversation. So, and you know, there's still stigma around the word. So the minute you say selling, we all get a little bit, you know, a little bit uptight, because we've potentially been sold to in that old school way. And I think that's where we've got to start moving into that future of it's about conversations now. So I love that, and I don't think you should ever stop doing it as long as you do it in that way, that it's about having that next conversation. It's lovely. Yeah.
Thank you.
Yeah, awesome. So so thank you so much for joining me. I hope that was really useful for you. Please connect if you haven't already, and again, thanks for your time. Any questions, let me know. I got so much more I could tell you, but I wanted to give you a flavour really of how excited I am about sales going forward. We've got a huge opportunity now. Nice to see you. Ta-ta for now.
Bye.
Bye.